You know what they say about small towns? Everybody knows everybody's business. What they don't tell you is that sometimes everybody's wrong, and sometimes everybody's complicit in the lie. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Ed Harlow, and I learned that lesson the hard way in Millbrook Harbor, Maine, where the salt air carries gossip faster than the wind carries seagulls. I wasn't always a painter. Hell, 6 months ago, I couldn't tell a paintbrush from a toothbrush. I was a construction foreman, built half the houses in this tourist trap, until a steel beam decided to have a conversation with my right arm. 3 surgeries later, I had a permanent limp, a useless dominant hand, and a wife who looked at me like I was damaged goods. "Ed, you're dripping paint on the hardwood again," Melissa called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that special tone wives reserve for husbands who've disappointed them. Again. I looked down at my easel, where I'd been attempting to capture the morning light streaming through our living room window. The painting looked like a kindergartner's finger painting, but it was therapeutic. Dr. Martinez said art would help with my recovery. What he didn't mention was that it would also help me discover what a lying, cheating snake I'd married. Melissa walked into the room, coffee mug in hand, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. At 39, she was still stunning. Auburn hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless even at 7 in the morning. She ran the Millbrook Harbor Gallery, the town's premier art venue, and she dressed the part. Today she wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly disability check. "I'll be late tonight," she said, not looking at me. "Gallery meeting with potential investors." "Another one?" I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. "That's the 3rd this week." She shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "The art world doesn't sleep, Ed. Some of us still have careers to worry about." The barb hit home, as intended. I watched her grab her purse and keys, noting how she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror twice before leaving. Melissa had always been vain, but lately she'd been preening like a peacock. After she left, I sat in the silence of our house, staring at my pathetic excuse for a painting. The morning light I'd been trying to capture was gone, replaced by the gray overcast that seemed to follow me everywhere these days. My phone buzzed. Text from Mick Sullivan, my best friend and the owner of The Anchor, the local dive bar where I'd been spending too much time lately. "Coffee? Got something to tell you." 20 minutes later, I was limping into The Anchor, the smell of stale beer and fried food greeting me like an old friend. Mick was behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of a man who'd been doing it for 20 years. "You look like hell," he said by way of greeting. "Feel worse? What's so important it couldn't wait until happy hour?" Mick glanced around the empty bar, then leaned closer. "It's about Melissa." My stomach dropped. "What about her?" "You know Tara Brennan? Blonde, works at the bank, big mouth?" I nodded. Tara was one of Melissa's friends, part of the tight-knit group of women who ruled the social scene in Millbrook Harbor. "She was in here last night, 3 sheets to the wind. Started talking about how Julian Crane's got the best brush in town." Mick paused, letting the implications sink in. "She wasn't talking about painting, Ed." Julian Crane. The name hit me like another steel beam. 45 years old, inherited money, owned a mansion on the hill overlooking the harbor. He collected art, drove a custom Porsche, and had the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having to work a day in his life. "You sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tara was giggling about it with her friends, said Melissa's been getting private viewing sessions at his place. I stared into my coffee, watching the cream swirl like a tiny hurricane. All those late nights, all those gallery meetings, all those times she'd come home smelling like expensive cologne instead of her usual perfume. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally. "What are you going to do?" I thought about it. The old Ed, The construction foreman with 2 good arms and a reputation for solving problems with his fists would have driven straight to Julian's mansion and settled things the traditional way. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was smarter now, more patient, more dangerous. "I'm going to paint," I said. That afternoon, I drove to the electronics store in the next town over. Amazon might be wonderful, as I'd discovered during my long recovery, but some things required immediate attention. I bought a small GPS tracker, the kind paranoid parents use to monitor their teenagers. The clerk, a kid with purple hair and multiple piercings, didn't ask questions. Installing it on Melissa's BMW took 5 minutes. I hid it inside the spare tire compartment where she'd never think to look. I wasn't James Bond, but I didn't need to be. I just needed the truth. That evening, Melissa came home at 11:30, claiming the investor meeting had run late. She smelled like Julian's cologne, Tom Ford Oud Wood, a scent I recognized because I'd bought her a bottle last Christmas. Apparently, she'd been sharing. "How was the meeting?" I asked, not looking up from my easel. "Productive. We might get funding for the new contemporary wing." Lie. The tracker showed she'd spent 4 hours at Julian's mansion, nowhere near the gallery. "That's great, honey. Really great." She kissed the top of my head, a perfunctory gesture that felt like a betrayal in itself, and headed upstairs. I heard the shower running, washing away the evidence of her afternoon delight. I turned back to my painting, but instead of the seascape I'd been working on, I found myself sketching something else entirely. 2 figures intertwined, faces twisted in passion and deceit. It was crude, amateurish, but it captured something true. The next morning, while Melissa was still sleeping, I made my move. I crept into our bathroom and found her perfume collection arranged on the marble countertop like tiny soldiers. Her favorite was Chanel No. 5, the one she'd worn since college. I unscrewed the cap and emptied half the bottle down the drain, then refilled it with Julian's cologne. It was a small thing, almost petty, but I needed to know for certain. If she was sleeping with him, she'd recognize the scent immediately. Melissa came downstairs an hour later, looking nervous. She kept touching her neck, where she'd applied the doctored perfume, and glancing at me with something that might have been guilt. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine. She kept checking her phone, typing quick messages when she thought I wasn't looking. Her hands shook slightly as she poured her coffee. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that my wife was cheating on me with Julian Crane. The knowledge settled into my bones like winter cold, but with it came something unexpected: clarity. I'd been thinking like a victim, feeling sorry for myself because of my injury, my limitations, my reduced circumstances. But victims don't get revenge. Artists do. And I was about to become a very creative artist indeed. The GPS tracker became my new best friend. For 3 days, I watched Melissa's movements on my phone like a hawk studying prey. Gallery in the morning, lunch at the country club, then straight to Julian's mansion every afternoon from 2 to 6. The pattern was so predictable, it was almost insulting. On Thursday, I decided to see for myself. Julian's place sat on 5 acres of prime real estate overlooking Millbrook Harbor, a sprawling modern monstrosity of glass and steel that looked like it belonged in Los Angeles, not coastal Maine. I parked my beat-up Ford pickup behind a cluster of pine trees about 200 yards away and waited. At 2:15, Melissa's silver BMW pulled through the electronic gates. I raised the binoculars I'd borrowed from Mick and watched my wife of 15 years walk up to another man's front door like she owned the place. Julian answered wearing a silk robe and nothing else, apparently. Melissa melted into his arms like butter on warm toast, and they disappeared inside. The show was over before it began, but I'd seen enough. I sat in my truck for 4 hours, taking pictures of the house, the cars, the license plates, anything that might be useful later. I wasn't sure what I was planning yet, but I'd learned in construction that you always gather your materials before you start building. At 6 o'clock sharp, Melissa emerged looking appropriately disheveled. She spent 5 minutes in her car, probably fixing her makeup and rehearsing her lies for the evening. Then she drove home to play the devoted wife. "How was your day?" she asked that night over dinner, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Productive," I said, cutting my steak with my left hand. "I'm working on a new painting, something with more passion." She didn't catch the double meaning, but she would soon enough. The next morning, I decided to confront her, not with accusations or anger, but with simple, direct questions. Sometimes the best way to expose a liar is to let them hang themselves with their own words. "Melissa, we need to talk." She was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone with the obsessive focus of a teenager. "Can it wait? I have a busy day." "I'm sure you do. Julian keeping you occupied?" Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might get whiplash. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just wondering about your new investor, Julian Crane, right? Tara mentioned he's been very hands-on with the gallery project." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "Tara talks too much. Julian's a serious collector, Ed. He's interested in supporting local art." "I bet he is. What kind of art does he collect?" "Contemporary pieces, mostly. Abstract work." "Nude studies?" "What?" "Nothing. Just curious about his tastes." Melissa set down her phone and turned to face me fully. "Ed, what's this really about? You've been acting strange lately." Here it was, the moment of truth. I could have laid out the evidence, shown her the GPS logs, described exactly what I'd seen at Julian's house. Instead, I chose a different approach. "I think I'm losing my mind," I said, letting my voice crack slightly. "Since the accident, I can't shake the feeling that you're slipping away from me. That maybe you'd be better off with someone who isn't broken." It was masterful, if I do say so myself. Instead of putting her on the defensive, I'd made myself the victim. And Melissa, being a narcissist at heart, took the bait completely. "Oh, Ed," she said, rushing to embrace me. "You're not broken. You're healing, and I'm not going anywhere." She held me tight, stroking my hair like I was a wounded animal. But even as she comforted me, I could feel the tension in her body, the way she kept glancing at her phone. "I love you," she whispered, and I almost believed she meant it. "I love you too," I replied, and I almost meant it. But love and revenge aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're the same thing. That afternoon, while Melissa was at her regularly scheduled rendezvous, I drove to the Anchor to meet with Mick. The bar was nearly empty, just a couple of day drinkers nursing their sorrows in the corner. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Mick said, sliding a beer across the bar. "Worse, I've seen the truth." I told him everything. The GPS tracker, the surveillance, the confrontation that morning. Mick listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "So what's the plan?" he asked when I finished. "That's what I need to figure out. The old me would have kicked down Julian's door and beaten him senseless. But that's not an option anymore. Maybe that's for the best. Violence is temporary. Humiliation lasts forever." Mick had a point. In a small town like Millbrook Harbor, reputation was everything. Julian and Melissa had built their lives on their images. His as the sophisticated collector, hers as the respected gallery director. What if those images were shattered? "There's something else," Mick said, lowering his voice. "Julian's hosting a big gallery opening next weekend. Some fancy exhibition Melissa's been organizing for months. Half the town's going to be there." An idea began forming in my mind, dark and beautiful like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Tell me more about this opening." "It's Melissa's big break from what I hear. Some hotshot art critic from New York is supposed to be there. Could make or break her career. Perfect. Nothing like a public stage for a private humiliation." I spent the next 2 days planning, researching, and preparing. I learned everything I could about the gallery opening, the guest list, the featured artists. I also learned some interesting facts about Julian Crane that I filed away for future use. The man had a weakness for expensive cars, exotic travel, and married women. He'd been divorced twice, both times for adultery, and both times he'd managed to keep most of his money through prenuptial agreements and clever lawyers. But Julian had never dealt with a creative mind bent on revenge. He was about to get an education in the fine art of destruction. Sunday evening, Melissa came home glowing with excitement. "The opening is going to be incredible," she gushed over dinner. "Julian's lending some pieces from his private collection. There's going to be champagne, live music, maybe even some local TV coverage." "Sounds wonderful," I said. "Mind if I come?" She nearly choked on her wine. "You? But you hate gallery events." "I'm trying to broaden my horizons. Besides, I'd like to meet this Julian fellow. He sounds fascinating." "I don't think that's a good idea, Ed. You might be uncomfortable." "Why? Because I'm not sophisticated enough for your art world friends?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She fumbled for an answer, and I watched her struggle with the delicious satisfaction of a cat playing with a wounded mouse. "Fine," she said finally. "You can come, but please try to behave." "Don't worry," I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. "I promise to be on my best behavior." I meant every word. My best behavior was going to be absolutely devastating. Monday morning, I put the first phase of my plan into motion. While Melissa was at the gallery, I drove to Julian's mansion with a toolbox full of supplies and 15 years of construction experience to guide me. The security system was impressive, but not impenetrable. Julian relied on electronic surveillance and motion sensors, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd hired the same company that had installed systems in half the houses I'd built. I knew their weaknesses like a pianist knows scales. The garage was separate from the main house, connected by a covered walkway. Getting inside took me exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Julian's precious Porsche sat gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a mechanical jewel. I started with the air vents, carefully removing the intake covers and pouring fish sauce into the ventilation system. The smell wouldn't be noticeable immediately, but after a few hours in the sun, that car would reek like a seafood processing plant. Next, I applied a series of small, nearly invisible stickers to strategic locations around the vehicle. Cheater in tiny letters along the doorframe, liar on the rear bumper, homewrecker on the driver's side mirror. They looked like decorative trim unless you knew what to look for. I was just finishing up when I heard footsteps in the driveway. Julian's voice carried through the garage door, talking to someone on his phone about wine selections for the gallery opening. "My gallery opening," I corrected mentally. There was nowhere to hide in the garage, so I did the only thing I could. I crawled under the Porsche and held my breath. Julian entered through the side door, still chattering about champagne and canapes. His Italian leather shoes stopped inches from my face. No, the Dom Perignon is for the VIP guests only," he was saying. "Melissa insists on making a good impression for the critic from New York. Melissa insists." The casual intimacy in his voice made my jaw clench. Julian moved toward the workbench, and I saw my chance. I rolled out from under the car and slipped toward the door, but I'd forgotten about his dog, a massive German shepherd that chose that moment to come bounding into the garage. The dog saw me immediately and started barking like the world was ending. Julian spun around, his phone clattering to the concrete floor. "What the hell?" I didn't stick around for introductions. I bolted through the door and ran for my truck, my bad leg screaming in protest. The dog followed, still barking, and Julian's shouts joined the chorus behind me. I made it to my truck and peeled out just as Julian emerged from the garage, his face red with rage and confusion. In my rearview mirror, I saw him trying to calm his dog while scanning the trees where I'd been hiding. Phase 1 was complete, messier than planned but successful. Phase 2 required a more delicate touch. That afternoon, I called Julian's house from a burner phone I'd bought specifically for this purpose. A woman answered. His current wife, Patricia, a former model who'd married him for his money and stayed for the lifestyle. "Mrs. Crane? This is Detective Nash with the Millbrook Harbor Police." I'd practiced the voice for hours, gruff and authoritative. "I'm calling about your husband's activities at the Harbor Gallery. We've received some disturbing reports." "What kind of reports?" "I'd rather not discuss this over the phone, ma'am, but I think you should know that your husband has been seen entering and leaving the gallery director's residence at unusual hours. There may be some impropriety involved." I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Are you saying Julian is having an affair?" "I'm not saying anything officially, ma'am, but if I were you, I'd pay close attention to his activities this week, particularly around the gallery opening." I hung up before she could ask more questions. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for it to grow. Wednesday evening, I put Phase 3 into motion. I'd spent 2 days working on a special painting, a masterpiece of crude artistry that captured Julian and Melissa in a compromising position. It wasn't pornographic exactly, but it left nothing to the imagination. The gallery had a back entrance that Melissa used for deliveries. I'd helped install the lock system 3 years ago, and I still had the override codes. Getting inside after hours was easier than breaking into Julian's garage. Melissa's featured piece for the opening was a large, abstract canvas titled Harbor Dreams, a swirling mass of blues and grays that was supposed to represent the eternal nature of the sea or some such nonsense. It hung in the center of the main wall, positioned for maximum impact when guests entered. I carefully removed Harbor Dreams and replaced it with my own creation, which I'd titled Private Viewing. Then I hid Melissa's painting in the storage room and slipped out the way I'd come. The opening was still 3 days away, but I couldn't resist driving by the gallery the next morning to see if anyone had noticed the switch. Through the front window, I could see Melissa standing in front of my painting, her face white as fresh snow. My phone rang 10 minutes later. "Ed, someone broke into the gallery last night." Melissa's voice was shaky, panicked. "They replaced my painting with some kind of obscene caricature." "That's terrible," I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Did they take anything?" "No, that's the weird part. They just switched the paintings. The police think it might be some kind of prank, but Ed, the painting shows 2 people who look like Julian and me." "Really? That's strange. Why would someone paint you and Julian?" "I don't know." The desperation in her voice was music to my ears. "The opening is in 2 days. If I can't find my original piece, I'm sure it'll turn up. Maybe check the storage room?" There was a pause, then the sound of heels clicking on hardwood floors. "Oh my God, it's here. But how did you know to—" "Lucky guess. I'll be right over to help you rehang it." By the time I arrived at the gallery, Melissa had already taken down my masterpiece and restored her boring abstract to its place of honor. But the damage was done. Word was already spreading through Millbrook Harbor's gossip network about the mysterious painting that had appeared overnight. Tara Brennan cornered me outside the gallery, her eyes bright with malicious curiosity. "Ed, did you see that crazy painting someone put up? It looked just like Melissa and Julian Crane, if you know what I mean." "Really? I wouldn't know. Art isn't my strong suit." "Oh, come on. Everyone's talking about it. Some people are saying it's a sign that those 2 are what?" Tara leaned closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Having an affair." I feigned shock. "That's ridiculous. Melissa would never." "Honey, wake up and smell the coffee. Your wife's been spending more time at Julian's house than his own wife has." "How would you know that?" "Because Patricia Crane called me yesterday, asking all sorts of questions about Melissa and Julian. Apparently, someone tipped her off about their little afternoon meetings." The pieces were falling into place beautifully. By Friday evening, half the town would be expecting fireworks at the gallery opening. They wouldn't be disappointed. Friday morning brought the first real explosion. I was in my studio, pretending to work on a seascape, when I heard shouting from the driveway. Through the window, I watched Patricia Crane climb out of a white Mercedes, her face twisted with rage. She marched up to our front door and pounded on it like she was trying to break it down. Melissa answered, still in her bathrobe, completely unprepared for what was coming. "You home-wrecking slut!" Patricia's voice carried across the entire neighborhood. "Stay away from my husband! Patricia, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. I know you've been screwing Julian. The police called me. They have evidence." I had to admire Patricia's commitment to the role. She grabbed Melissa by the shoulders and shook her like a rag doll, then slapped her hard enough to leave a handprint. "If I see you near Julian again, I'll destroy you," Patricia hissed. "I'll make sure you never work in this town again." She stormed back to her Mercedes and peeled out, leaving Melissa standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face and a bright red mark on her cheek. I gave her 5 minutes to compose herself before wandering downstairs with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "What was all that noise? I thought I heard shouting." Melissa was sitting at the kitchen table, holding an ice pack to her face. "Patricia Crane thinks I'm having an affair with Julian." "Are you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Melissa's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell the truth. "Of course not. How could you even ask me that?" "Because Patricia Crane doesn't seem like the type to slap people without good reason. She's obviously unstable, jealous. Julian's been helping with the gallery and she's twisted it into something sick." I nodded sympathetically. "That must be why someone painted that picture of you two together. Jealous wife, anonymous tip to the police. It's all starting to make sense." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you should be more careful about appearances. This is a small town, Melissa. People talk." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Was I suspicious or just concerned? Did I know something, or was I as clueless as she hoped? "You're right," she said finally. "I'll be more careful." But it was too late for careful. The war had gone public, and I was just getting started. That afternoon, while Melissa was at the gallery doing last-minute preparations for the opening, I paid a visit to WKHB, the local radio station. The DJ, a guy named Tommy Ricci, owed me a favor from when I'd fixed his deck for free the previous summer. "I need you to play something special during Melissa's interview tomorrow morning," I told him, handing over a USB drive. "What is it?" "Let's call it a blooper reel. Trust me, your listeners will love it." Tommy plugged in the drive and listened to a few seconds of the audio I'd compiled. Melissa's voice, drunk and giggly, describing Julian's talents in explicit detail. It was from a party 6 months ago when she'd had too much wine and thought she was being discreet with her friends. "Jesus, Ed, where did you get this?" "Does it matter? The question is, are you going to play it?" Tommy was quiet for a moment, weighing his professional ethics against his love of good radio drama. "She'll sue me into next week." "Not if it's an accident. Technical difficulties happen all the time, right? Wrong button, computer glitch. These things are unavoidable." I left the station with a handshake and a promise. Tomorrow morning's interview was going to be very educational for Melissa's listeners. Saturday dawned gray and drizzly, perfect weather for a public humiliation. I tuned into WKHB at exactly 9 o'clock when Melissa's interview was scheduled to begin. "Good morning, this is Tommy Ricci, and I'm here with Melissa Harlow, director of the Millbrook Harbor Gallery. Melissa, tell us about tonight's opening." "Well, Tommy, we're featuring some incredible contemporary pieces, including work from my husband Ed, who's recently discovered his artistic talents after his accident." That's when the technical difficulties began. Melissa's voice cut out mid-sentence, replaced by her drunken confession from the party. "Julian's got the most amazing hands, and don't get me started on what he can do with his tongue." The audio played for 15 seconds before Tommy managed to cut it off, but the damage was done. In a town of 3,000 people, 15 seconds might as well have been 15 minutes. "Sorry, folks, we're having some technical problems here," Tommy stammered. "Let's go to a commercial break." My phone started ringing immediately. First Mick, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Then my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, wanting to know if I'd heard that awful business on the radio. Then my brother in Portland, who'd been listening online. Melissa called 20 minutes later, sobbing hysterically. "Ed, you have to come get me. I can't drive. Everyone's staring at me." I found her in the radio station parking lot, sitting in her BMW with the engine running and tears streaming down her face. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "How did this happen?" she kept asking. "How did they get that recording?" "I don't know, honey. Maybe someone at the party recorded it. You know how people are with their phones these days." She nodded miserably. "The opening is ruined. Half the guest list has already called to cancel. The critic from New York won't return my calls." I helped her into the passenger seat and drove her home, making soothing noises while inside I was celebrating. The public humiliation was working better than I'd hoped. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I drove to the Anchor for what I knew would be the final confrontation. Julian was already there when I arrived, sitting alone at the far end of the bar with a whiskey in his hand and murder in his eyes. The place was packed for a Saturday night, filled with locals who'd all heard the radio broadcast and were hoping for more entertainment. They weren't going to be disappointed. Julian saw me the moment I walked in and stood up so fast he knocked over his bar stool. "You son of a bitch," he snarled, advancing on me with his fists clenched. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "I think I'm a lot of things," I replied calmly, "but clever isn't the word I'd use. You ruined everything. The opening, Melissa's career, my marriage. Your marriage was ruined the moment you decided to screw my wife. I just made it public knowledge." Julian threw a punch that would have connected with my jaw if I'd been the same man I was 6 months ago. But months of physical therapy had taught me to compensate for my limitations. I ducked under his swing and used my cane to sweep his legs out from under him. Julian went down hard, his expensive suit scraping against the sawdust-covered floor. The bar erupted in cheers and laughter. "Stay down," I advised him. "This doesn't have to get worse." But Julian was beyond reason. He scrambled to his feet and charged at me again, this time aiming low. I sidestepped and brought my cane down across his back, sending him sprawling into a table full of beer bottles. Mick appeared at my elbow, grinning like a shark. "Need any help, Ed?" "I think I've got it handled." Julian tried to get up again, but 3 of the regulars, guys I'd worked with over the years, held him down while I approached. "Here's what's going to happen," I told him, my voice carrying to every corner of the now silent bar. "You're going to leave my wife alone. You're going to leave this town. And if I ever see you again, I'm going to finish what we started here tonight." "You can't threaten me," Julian gasped, blood trickling from his split lip. "I'll have you arrested." "For what? Self-defense? In front of 30 witnesses who saw you throw the first punch?" I looked around the bar, meeting the eyes of everyone present. These were my people, men and women I'd known for years, who'd watched me build their homes and raise their children. They knew who I was, and they knew what Julian represented. "Anyone here see me start this fight?" I asked. The silence was deafening. Julian's face went pale as he realized his situation. In Boston or New York, money and connections might have saved him. But in Millbrook Harbor, he was just another outsider who'd overstayed his welcome. I helped him to his feet with mock courtesy and brushed the sawdust off his jacket. "Your car's probably pretty ripe by now," I mentioned casually. "You might want to get that looked at." Julian staggered toward the door, his dignity in tatters. At the threshold, he turned back for one final threat. "This isn't over, Harlow." "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." The bar erupted in applause as Julian disappeared into the night. Someone bought me a beer, then another, and before long the whole place was celebrating like we'd won the World Series. But even as I accepted congratulations and backslaps, I knew the real finale was still to come. Julian might be beaten, but Melissa was still my wife, and she had one more lesson to learn about the consequences of betrayal. Sunday arrived with the kind of storm that makes coastal Maine famous, driving rain, howling wind, and waves that crashed against the harbor seawall like artillery shells. It was perfect weather for endings. I was in my studio, putting the finishing touches on a new painting, when Melissa came downstairs. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, which was probably true. The radio broadcast had made her a pariah overnight, and the gallery opening had been postponed indefinitely. "We need to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from my easel. "I'm listening." "I know you know about Julian." I set down my brush and turned to face her fully. "Do you?" "I'm not stupid, Ed. The GPS tracker in my car, the painting that mysteriously appeared at the gallery, the radio broadcast. It's all too convenient to be coincidence." I had to admire her deductive skills, even if they were coming a little late to the party. "So what do you want to talk about?" Melissa took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. Instead, she went on the attack. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you humiliate me like that? I made one mistake." "One mistake? You've been screwing Julian Crane for months. Because you weren't there for me. After your accident, you became this pathetic, broken thing. I needed someone who made me feel alive. So you found Julian." "Yes, I found Julian. And he made me remember who I used to be before I married a construction worker and settled for a life in this nowhere town." The words hit like physical blows, but I'd been expecting them. Melissa had always been ashamed of my blue-collar background, my lack of sophistication, my inability to fit into her artsy world. "Well, now you can go back to being that person full-time," I said calmly. "I want a divorce." She laughed, a bitter sound that matched the storm outside. "Fine, but don't think you're going to take me to the cleaners. I've got lawyers, too." "Actually, I don't think you do." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "See, while you were playing house with Julian, I was doing some research. It turns out adultery is still grounds for divorce in Maine, especially when there's evidence." I opened the folder and showed her the photographs I'd taken, the GPS logs, the bank records showing Julian's payments to the gallery that had mysteriously found their way into her personal account. "You've been embezzling from the gallery to fund your affair," I continued. "That's a felony, Melissa, the kind that comes with prison time." The color drained from her face. "You can't prove that." "I already have. The question is what happens next." Before she could respond, we heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I saw Julian's Porsche, or what was left of it. The fish sauce had done its work, and someone had apparently keyed the paint job. Julian himself looked even worse, his face bruised from our encounter at the anchor. "He's here," Melissa whispered. "So he is." Julian didn't bother knocking. He kicked in the front door like he owned the place and stormed into my studio, dripping wet and wild-eyed. "You destroyed everything," he screamed at me. "My marriage, my reputation, my car." "Your car was already destroyed," I pointed out. "I just helped it along." Julian pulled a gun from his jacket pocket, a small chrome pistol that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I should kill you right now." "You should," I agreed. "But you won't." "What makes you so sure?" "Because you're not a killer, Julian. You're a spoiled rich boy who's never faced real consequences for anything. You think waving that gun around makes you dangerous? But all it does is prove how weak you really are." I stood up slowly, my cane in my hand, and took a step toward him. A real man would have fought for his woman instead of sneaking around behind her husband's back. A real man would have faced me directly instead of hiding in his mansion. But you're not a real man, are you, Julian? His hand was shaking now, the gun wavering between me and Melissa. Shut up, he whispered. You want to know the funny part? I actually feel sorry for you. All that money, all those possessions, and you're still empty inside. That's why you need to steal other men's wives, because you can't build anything of your own. Julian's face crumpled, and I saw the broken child beneath the expensive clothes and artificial confidence. The gun dropped to his side. I loved her, he said quietly. No, you didn't. You loved the idea of her, the thrill of taking something that belonged to someone else. But love? You wouldn't recognize love if it bit you on the ass. I walked over and gently took the gun from his hand. He didn't resist. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and reasonable. You're going to leave Millbrook Harbor tonight and never come back. Melissa's going to resign from the gallery and move somewhere far away, where she can start over without the baggage of what she's done here. And I'm going to keep all the evidence I've gathered locked away, as long as you both disappear from my life permanently. And if we don't? Melissa asked. I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then I release everything to the police, the newspapers, and the internet. Your affair becomes public record, Julian's assault charge gets filed, and Melissa's embezzlement gets prosecuted to the full extent of the law. They looked at each other, then back at me, and I could see the moment when they realized they had no choice. You can't do this, Julian said weakly. I already have. The storm outside was reaching its peak, rain hammering against the windows like bullets. Lightning illuminated the room in stark black and white, and in that moment I saw them clearly for what they were. Two selfish, empty people who had destroyed everything good in their lives for a few months of stolen pleasure. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. Now. They left without another word, Julian helping Melissa gather her things while I watched from the window. The Porsche wouldn't start. The fish sauce had apparently done more damage than I'd anticipated, so they called a taxi to take them to the train station. I never saw either of them again. 6 months later, I received divorce papers in the mail. Melissa had moved to California and was working as a waitress in San Francisco. Julian had lost his mansion in the divorce settlement and was living in a studio apartment in Boston, selling insurance for a living. I signed the papers without hesitation and mailed them back the same day. The gallery closed permanently, and the building was eventually converted into a seafood restaurant. The new owners kept one small corner as a display space for local artists, and my paintings now hang there alongside work by other Millbrook Harbor residents. I never remarried. I didn't need to. I had my art, my friends, and my self-respect. Most importantly, I had the satisfaction of knowing that when life knocked me down, I got back up and fought back with everything I had. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I disagree. The best revenge is served hot, public, and with a side of poetic justice. And in the end, that's exactly what Julian Crane and my ex-wife Melissa got.